Hey guys. Today I'll be looking into more details of the film subgenre psychological thriller. In this video I'll be looking into the different styles, characteristics and evolution of psychological thriller films, as well as giving examples of some of my favourite films from the genre. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, what is a psychological thriller? Well, by Google definition, a psychological thriller is a thriller narrative that emphasizes the unstable or delusional psychological states of its characters. In terms of context and convention, it is a subgenre of the thriller narrative. Psychological thrillers usually have narratives with domesticated settings in which action is suppressed and thrills are provided through investigation of the principles and mental states of characters. So now let's look at the key characteristics that actually make a psychological thriller. More often, psychological thrillers focus on the mental state of a character and often play with reality and fantasy. An extremely important thing to note about psychological thrillers is that they are all about perception. For example, in the film Shutter Island, we as an audience are given the perception that the main character Teddy is actually a detective investigating a case in the asylum. This is because this is all we have ever known, and Teddy is the protagonist of the film, so we only really get his point of view. However, at the end of the film, it turns out that Teddy is actually a patient in the asylum, and all of the staff are in hospital are just trying to do one last experiment to try and get him over the insanity of a place he is in. This brings me on to a technique that is usually used in psychological thrillers, and that is plot twists. Plot twists are almost necessary in the genre. A plot twist, for those of you that don't know, is a radical change of direction to the expected outcome of a plot. This often happens at the end of a story and is supposed to create a shock to the audience. So finally, we're going to be looking at the evolution of psychological thrillers. Now in 1960, the film Psycho was released. Psycho, a film by Alfred Hitchcock, was a powerful and complex psychological thriller and is extremely famous still to this day. Some even say it is the mother of all horror suspense films. Psycho is arguably one of the most famous psychological horror films. The film includes a plot twist at the end in which you discover that the mother, who is supposedly the one murdering people, is actually dead, and the son gained multiple personality disorder from the guilt of murdering his mother, and now he murders people dressed as his mother. In the 1970s, The Exorcist was released. This was significant because in this era, restriction on language, violence and adult content / sexuality had become less strict. In the 80s, The Evil Dead was released. In this era, film producers were using more special effects and increasing their budgets for films. At the end of this era, the genre of thriller was beginning to take over, and therefore, psychological thrillers followed. This was because producers and directors wanted to find new ways to creep out audiences, using the mind and perception. In 1995, the famous psychological thriller Seven was released. With the directing of David Fincher and the acting of Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt and Kevin Spacey, this film was a huge success. Using the concept of the 7 deadly sins, the film consists of a horrifying narrative with a gut-wrenching plot twist at the very end of the film. This is thoroughly a great watch and I recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it already. Finally, one of probably the most well-known psychological thrillers has to be Inception. This film is so well known because of its mind-boggling narrative that has caused some viewers to watch the film over a couple of times just to fully grasp the concept. The ending of Inception is very unique because it is left to interpretation of the audience. Is Cobb in the real world? Is he still in limbo? Or does he just not care anymore? We will never know, and that is the beauty of it. So that's all we have time for today, but I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe even learned a little from it. If you want to see some more of my own film projects, make sure to browse through the rest of my channel, and I will leave a link to my favourite projects in the description of this video. Farewell.